Well, hey, everybody, we want to welcome you back to another episode of On the Other Hand.
Yes, we do.
I'm here with Jonathan, and last week we started part one of our a series, a two-part series called...
We didn't intend it to be a two-part.
No, we didn't. But there was some great stuff to talk about. We're going to talk more into this, and it's really about social media, specifically as it relates to parenting in the home. And we came up with some dangers and some solutions last week.
Yeah, in fact, I feel like last week, much to my chagrin, we primarily fixated on the negatives, right? And so the question we want to come back and revisit after we recap a little bit here is, are there positives, right? Are there things that are beneficial to the new era in social media that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, and we hope that even last week was enjoyable and
here on a social media platform.
That's right, because that's what we're doing. And so let's cover some of those things. What are some of the things that we identified? Just and by the way, if you didn't get in on last week's, we would encourage you to go back to last week's on YouTube and get there and review, because it'll help today's episode make a little bit more sense. But just by way of review, what were some of the things that we discussed?
So actually, I want to know what popped for you last week. Like, what stuck in your mind from then till now? Actually,
it was something you said, and it was that social media comes with an agenda. That it isn't this benign thing in our lives that, just like we wouldn't let the creepy guy come into our house that was hiding behind the bushes looking in, that it has that element of it kind of creeps in. Our kids will be accessing something. We don't know, all the things that they're going to encounter on social media. You actually brought a story about that, into that realm. And then there is a goal, a social engineering, even, if you will, that is very, very prevalent, and it's becoming more so as time goes on. It's one of the fears I think parents have.
Well, it's one of the challenges of monetizing, right? Social media, social engagement. And so companies are now paying millions of dollars for the data available to know what you shop for, so that they can uniquely curtail the ads you see. And it's quite literally by what you search, how long you look at images. It is creating a culture of confirmation bias at every turn. And it's a real issue for sure. I mean, it is, you have to go into it recognizing there is an agenda. And often you're driving the agenda, but I've been amazed. Good friends of mine, even family members, when they make a comment, in particular in the political arena, right? Often I think we must be seeing two entirely different news stories, right? They both seem like fact, and what I've discovered is that is actually true. They are not seeing the articles that I'm seeing, right? And I'm not seeing the ones that they're seeing. That's a problem.
Yeah, and we also brought up the idea of addiction. That to that point of tracking, monitoring, they're not advertising, but they've created a platform that is intentionally addictive. You brought up the idea that even, I think you said, like Facebook CEOs, right? People in the company won't allow their children to just have unlimited access to these platforms that they themselves created, right? But we also brought up that idea of stopping points, where if you have a book, it has chapters, it at least forces you to say, is this something I want to continue? Where the scrolling mechanisms, the advertising, all is designed to draw me in further. So, and you brought up this too, it's not just addiction with our children, it's something that we struggle with. It's an addiction that is in the culture itself right now as adults, as parents, and we need to pay attention to some of those kinds of things. So, what are some of the solutions that we brought to the table last week for our audience?
Well, so I think some of the solutions are something my son actually references frequently, that he recognizes that there's an agenda, and so intentionally doesn't like certain things that maybe you'd normally like, right? Or likes things that you wouldn't normally like, just to keep the algorithms confused, right? To create an opportunity for me to hear from the other side, because there is this design element to it that wants to isolate and separate.
So it's literally like a rage against the machine, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I'm going to like things that, and I'm going to ruin the algorithm. I love that. That's great.
And I would say, You've probably seen the photograph before, but it says social media. It has a subway car, and everybody's on their phone, right? We see lots of these images. But then it showed one from the 1950s, same subway car, and everyone's looking at a newspaper. Right, so we have actually this hard wiring to isolate often, and whatever creates an opportunity for that eliminates the awkwardness in conversation. I don't know you. How can I avoid? We actually have a natural human tendency towards that. It just isn't healthy for us.
I remember they used to say if you want to make somebody feel comfortable, put a cup of coffee between you and them, and now it's your phone, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
By the way, we have a line here on our table, and I tell you what, if you cross that line, it's my personal space.
What do you mean if I cross it by more than half?
That's right.
Okay.
So one of the things that I want to bring up relating to this conversation that we really didn't dive into, didn't have time to last episode, but it deals with the danger of a targeted audience, right? Mm-hmm. That we're being targeted. They're tracking us. Our kids are known. Every like that they do, all of those kinds of things gear social media. And you kind of mentioned it here just a minute ago, but that idea that when it comes to even news outlets now, that a lot of this, we often think of social in terms of Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but or Twitter, but in terms of even our news outlets, a similar thing is taking place, and so it's very much personality driven. I think as I say that, parents out there are going, "Yeah, I know what you're talking about." That there's the tendency to for organizations or individuals that are using these platforms to demand your loyalty. And the way that they do that is through their personality, calling you back because they have engaging subjects. Very much what we're doing. We're demanding loyalty from you right now with these engaging subjects. We're hoping somebody will watch. Yeah, but because of that, what can happen is a certain isolation. Actually, it's interesting to me. My perception is, and I see this really in my own life. I see this in my two teenagers. I mentioned them. I see the tendency is it's easy to get locked into a personality that gives me one stream of information, an information stream they control. They're suggesting they're experts in a particular field, but because it's so easy, because I have a limited amount of time, because I'm on my drive listening to a podcast, right, I end up getting locked into that one stream of information, and I don't engage outside of it. It's just too easy to stay put. That's a danger, and we've kind of alluded to it, but why don't you talk around that one for a little bit? What have you observed in that?
So I'll be entirely honest. I actually think Christians in general are somewhat predisposed to ignore certain facts, right? And so there's almost this sense that what faith is or what loyalty is never questioning. And so while there may actually be answers to really serious questions, there's sort of a default to ignore the question because that means I'm faithful or faith-filled. And the reality is, and when you discover this, there are no questions that God is afraid of, right? He has reasonable answers to the most difficult questions that are out there, and they can even be found in the Scriptures. But when you're predisposed to ignore anything that seems contrary, then you will isolate yourself, right? And what you will actually create is a world in which you are in an echo chamber. You only listen to people who agree with you. And so for a pastor, for myself, to get up on a Sunday and make an offhanded comment, to flip the script on a political issue, right? That God even loves Republicans, right? To make a joke like that, people in the room are predisposed to believe that, no, if you're a Christian, you are a Republican. Except in my grandmother's generation in the South, in Memphis, where I was born,
it was different. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If you were a Christian, you were a Democrat back then.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's one of the dangers of the church getting off mission.
Yeah.
Right. And saying no, political power, might, and authority in a secular sense is how we accomplish our mission. It's actually how we get off track more often than not. And that's not to say those things are unimportant, right? They're important. And I hope more and more Christians become politicians. Sure. But the reality is that that we're a part of a different kingdom.
Well, and it's interesting because in one sense, the pushback, on the other hand, to that is, but we have more voices available to us than ever before. I mean, even just this week, former President Trump came out. Everybody knows this, right? Came out with his own media platform.
Well, it depends on what news feed you get.
That's right.
Yeah, they may know it.
Yeah, and so I mean, they continually are created. I remember when we first got smartphones, there were like a half a dozen apps, and that was exciting. And now, they just continue to multiply. So it appears as if there's more voices that we have access to. And the reality is, because it's so personality driven, we end up inadvertently, unintentionally listening to fewer and fewer sources, fewer and fewer voices. And that can be polarizing, can be a real danger.
So people ask me all the time, they're like, so did you hear about, right? Or they vilify somebody on the other side of the aisle or whatever it is. And at this point in my life, after knowing enough people who have ended up in the news, I've concluded I actually don't have any idea. There are really a handful of things that are within my sphere of influence and firsthand knowledge that I'm certain about, right? When I listen to the reports on CNN or Fox or Newsmax or you name it, right? When I listen to those reports, I rarely believe that I have gotten the full story. And that doesn't even mean that the story I've gotten is a lie. I don't know that either, right?
But you kind of have that in your subconscious of going, this isn't all there
I could
is.
waste and do an enormous amount of time trying to come to conclusions about things that I simply cannot have enough data about to come to a good conclusion.
Right. So this is called On the Other Hand. That's our podcast, On the Other Hand. So those are some of the dangers we see. I don't know that there's anything brand new, but it's certainly something we're all wrestling with. But as we discuss these issues, these are not new issues for us, right? As we discuss these, what we've discovered is that people drive in one direction or the other. Either like there are no gates. I say yes every time my kids ask for something because I don't want to hinder their development, or social media is awful. I don't use it. I'm off the grid. I mean, and we probably understand both positions. So what we want to do, even for the remainder of this discussion, so what are some of the positives? I mean, is there anything good here? And the reason we want to ask that question, and I want to ask that question, right, is because we're looking for things that are redeemable. Not everything is bad, right, about social media. And again, we're using this platform. So So take us into that for just a minute, and I'll have an opportunity here. But what are some of the things you identify as healthy?
Well, the fact that you can turn it off. I'm just kidding.
That's right.
No, it's a great question because we tend to look at the things that alarm us. For me in particular, as a parent, right, I'm asking the question, what is this producing in my kids? What is it produced in the kids who have gone just before them? And I'm always looking at that because I feel like I have this unique role in the life of my children to be discerning, to protect them. Someday they're going to have to make all their own decisions about that stuff, right? And I'm going to be releasing more and more of that authority in their lives over time. But right now, I have this responsibility to shepherd them. And so I have to make decisions about these things. My goal is not to make free agents out of my 10-year-old and 8-year-old and 9-year-old, right? All the research tells us the same thing when it comes to addiction, the development of the frontal lobe. Like, I'm not even sure mine's fully developed yet, but somewhere around 25, right? So their reasoning ability, all those things, I owe it to them to help steer that process. Because you asked the question about developmental, right?
Yeah, right.
I do believe there are positive developmental things in relationship to social media. I just don't actually think they're the social part of it, right? I think they're learning tools, they're learning ways to engage that are going to be absolutely relevant in their generation that probably weren't in previous ones, right? And so for them to understand those platforms, to engage on those platforms, it's duplicitous for a church to say, and for us in this podcast to say, there's no value. Right? I mean, if that's what we're saying, then we're saying, please quit watching this right now and get off of all social media. We believe there's a value. We're just saying there's caution to be exercised. Another value would be, as a leader, as a communicator, I have the opportunity to communicate with a much broader audience than I've ever had in the past.
Which became very apparent in COVID. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was an essential.
Yep. Yep. So I think there are positive developmental things, even for my kids. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Right now, our girls have these little iPads for homeschooling, and we had them in public school for the first 3 years. Fortunately for us, we had made the decision before COVID, so we were already kind of in that rhythm. But they've been watching these YouTube videos on these gals who are super creative and making Barbie things, like out of all kinds of stuff, and so they've been watching these videos, and then they started doing it. It's like sparking creativity, artistic ability, and their communication skill. And so when I listen to the little videos they're shooting, they're not posting them anywhere, right?
Yeah.
We're just giving them the tools to learn how to use this platform. As I listen to them, I'm discovering, man, my little girl is so articulate. Like, she communicates really well when she's in front of a camera, and I'm discovering these developments in them and their artistic gifting and their communication skills that I think are really valuable.
Well, and all my kids are better at math than me, and I blame it on the cool video games that they do at school.
Right.
And it's like, man, if I had that, I would have been better at math too, right? Yeah, all we had were blocks and sticks.
Sticks.
That's right. And to that point, I mean, some of the things that I have really noticed, as well, my family's ability. I mean, just real simplicity right here. My family's ability, my children's ability to connect cross-generationally with my parents, with cousins or aunts and uncles. And of course, we live in Alaska. This is unique to us, right? And so none of our family lives up here except us.
Right.
And so their ability to engage, share pictures, talk about what's going on, get feedback happens on Facebook, right? It happens on Messenger. There's like a kids messenger. And so talking to people in our ministries from the past, that's been a real advantage in terms of actual community.
Right.
And so there's some developmental, I mean, I would argue there was some developmental strategy to that, and social.
Yeah.
But the other thing, for me, I'll be honest, this is, and we talk about this all the time, and it's a tension, it's a wrestling. I don't have all the answers by any means on this, but me, that one of my core objectives as a dad is to make sure that if my kids are going to run into something outside of my home, right, when they graduate from my home, right, when they turn 18 and they take off. If they ever do, hopefully someday there's that launch point.
There's boomerang kids.
That's right. That's right.
Take off and come back.
But when that happens, I don't want them to fail. I don't want to discover that I didn't prepare them for something.
Yep.
And so if there's something that I know they will run into, then they will have to be disciplined in. They'd have to have a philosophy about. They'll have to engage for their job or whatever. I want to make sure that while they're in my home, I have opportunity to speak into those things.
Right.
And so for me, for instance, one of the things I get when I gave my kids a smartphone, for us it was freshman year of high school. Okay. That's when they're able to access that and some social media in a limited form. When that happens, I know there's the potential for failure. I just know it. I know there's the potential, even though we have all the parental controls and all the things that they tell you to get, I know that when they go to a locker room, their friends don't have those, right? I know perhaps, and I know that there's going to be texting and sharing. I know a lot of the dangers.
Well, you also know your kids are smarter than you, and they can find workarounds if
they can do all that. Absolutely. And so I'm not naive, but at the same time, I'm wrestling with that tension. I think a lot of parents are out there too, wrestling with that tension. Yeah, but I want them to know how to work through that. Mm-hmm. Failure is not the most important thing.
Right.
Working through that, and I want to do that in my home. Yeah. And so I see a developmental aspect there that this is part of how I am growing them to be successful adults.
Right. Yeah, and on the other hand, you don't want to put them in harm's way.
That's right.
Right. But you're right. To your point, failure is not the worst thing that could happen for them, right? Never learning the tools to navigate those situations for a lifetime outside of a relationship with me is the real danger. And part of that actually requires them failing and learning.
Yeah.
It does for all of us. No, you mentioned the locker room, or school. And sort of the joke when families homeschool, that I always heard was, my kids can read biblical Greek, but they don't know how to have a conversation, right? Like they're really smart in some areas, but no social skills. And so even for homeschool families, that ability to engage in a social network of relationships, to be able to FaceTime with my parents.
Social intelligence, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they're not getting it anywhere else quite often,
Yeah.
especially in this season of COVID. I can't read facial expressions because for the longest time, everybody around me was wearing a mask.
Yeah.
But I could on FaceTime, right? So some of those things I think are developmental skills that actually served families well, in particular in this last season.
Yeah. So resilience, I mean, that ability to say, hey, I know how to handle some of these things, we think that's good.
And it's an opportunity for me as a parent to show what grace looks like to my kids.
That's right.
Right. My agenda is not that you never make me look bad. Mm-hmm. My agenda is that you and I are connected and we continue to live life together. You value my input and influence in your life.
And one of the aspects of that, input, those kinds of things, is listening to different voices. I recognize my kids need to hear from other adults. That I shouldn't be the only voice in their life, but that there's a tendency, and I think even in Christian circles, right, for escapism. That what the solution to this is
for
to just escape it, but that doesn't necessarily prepare them for life, which is what we want to do.
Absolutely, So we're out of time.
Yeah.
We just got the 1 minute warning.
Nice.
And so what we want to just let you know on the way out here again is that you can check out the podcast. It's available on Spotify, but it's also the video is available on YouTube. And we would like you to go to YouTube. And if you will follow, like, and share, that would be awesome. We're going to try and shoot a new one of these every Monday. And hey, we hope this is helpful. Looking forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments. Have a great day.